can you linger on bin Laden? So this
Sure.
gave enough fuel for bin Laden to construct a narrative where America
That's
is
right.
the bad guys.
And this is such an important thing. There's this great book by Michael Scheuer, who was the former chief of the CIA's bin Laden unit. It's called Imperial Hubris. And I will say that he went a bit crazy in later years and said really mean things like we ought to help all the Muslims kill each other and we ought to have a civil war over Russiagate, and which I'm very, very opposed to Russiagate, Lex, but I wouldn't go that far. So he went a little nuts later on, but he's a very bright guy and a very honest guy for what it's worth, a very straightforward guy, I should say. I don't know if he's ever told a lie or what.
Imperial Hubris, Why the West is Losing the War on Terror, by Michael Scheuer. And I should also say, echoing that statement, that some of the smartest people I know are walking the line between genius and madness.
It happens.
And when you study the dark aspects of human nature and geopolitics, sometimes it's easy to lose yourself in the madness.
Yeah, it's totally true. But so in this book, he makes it so clear. There are 6 overriding reasons that bin Laden cited for why the United States should be attacked. Okay. And he compared this directly to the Ayatollah Khomeini, who would relentlessly criticize our culture and, licentiousness and Hollywood R-ratedness and all of that kind of stuff as like the degenerate society. But you can't recruit people for a war over that. You know what I mean? Not that he was really trying to, but that only inspires so much resentment, and conservatives don't like libertinism, right? Like that's okay, but it only goes so far, right? Bin Laden, on the other hand, said they occupy the land of the 2 holy places. They help Israel kill Palestinians and Lebanese. They support the dictators, especially in Saudi Arabia and Egypt, but around the Middle East. They put pressure on those dictators to keep oil prices artificially low, to subsidize our economy at their expense. Just think of all the times you've heard presidents say, I'm telling the Saudis, they better ramp up production and get the price of gas down for election day, right? As blatant as can be. But what does that sound like to the poor person in those countries? Isn't that money supposed to go to them? And then, as bin Laden would say, falsely, turning a blind eye to Russia, India, Kazakhstan, and China in their persecution of Muslims. So they say they love us so much, but they don't really, because they don't say anything when this group or that group are the ones killing us. So these were the things. And look, let us stipulate, Lex, okay, that Osama bin Laden's a mass murderer. And by tradition, I don't take the word of mass murderers for meaning very much, and I don't expect you to, okay? That's not the point. The point is, what did he say that got anybody to listen to him and do what he said? He wasn't in charge of a government. He had no coercive apparatus at all. His organization is purely volunteer-based. And he's asking people to blow themselves up over something important enough to blow yourself up for it. And it's not virgins. It's, we have a policy. Oh, I should stipulate virgins after you die. We have a policy. We're trying to provoke a war with the United States of America, and you're going to help us do it. Why? Because of these 6 reasons. That's why. And that was what worked to recruit people to attack the United States of America. Okay. Major, important case in point. And, well, whatever, the timeline jumps around here a bit, but major case in point is in 1996, when Israel, under Shimon Peres, re-invaded Lebanon in what was called Operation Grapes of Wrath. And during that invasion, it's hard to believe this. Wait, don't Google yet. Search this part. It was Naftali Bennett called in the artillery strike on a UN shelter and killed 106 women and children in Qana. That's Qana. In 1996.
Naftali Bennett, while serving as an Israeli army officer in 1996, commanded a commando unit during Operation Grapes of Wrath in southern Lebanon. During this operation, his troops came under mortar fire near the village of Qana. Bennett radioed for artillery support, so on, killing 106 people and injured many others.
In a UN shelter.
This humanitarian tragedy is widely known as the Qana Massacre.
Mm-hmm. So, when Shimon Peres launched that war, Mohammed Atta, the ringleader of the September 11th plotters in the United States, pilot of Flight 11, I believe, he and his buddy Ramzi bin al-Shibh, they were Egyptian engineering students studying in Hamburg, Germany. And when this invasion started, they both signed their last will and testament, which their friends and family and neighbors and whatever said was their expressed intent that like they're joining the army. They're deciding, forget engineering. I want to join the Mujahideen and go fight the good fight somewhere, whatever. Then, just a couple of months later, bin Laden put out his first declaration of war against the United States. It's called Declaration of War Against the Americans Occupying the Land of the Two Holy Places. Pretty subtle, right? And then on the first page, he goes on and on about the Qana massacre and says, we'll never forget the severed heads and arms and legs of the babies and the children in Qana. He told Robert Fisk, I believe, how come your blood is blood, but our blood is water? Well, we'll see about that.
That's a strong reminder that there's a cost to killing people.
Oh, yeah. So what happened was Muhammad Atta and Ramzi bin al-Shibh, they read that declaration of war, and that was when they decided to join al-Qaeda. It was based on the Qana massacre that Israel had perpetrated in Lebanon. So again, we're skipping ahead in the story. We're going to do the whole 90s here, but literally on September 11th, you had Egyptians volunteered for a Saudi sheikh to slaughter Americans by the thousands as revenge for American support for Israel killing people in Lebanon. That, my friend, is why George Bush said the Taliban did it because they hate your freedom. Right? Because they couldn't tell you that.
106 people. It's a reminder that killing can cause immeasurable escalation, trillions of dollars, all of it.
Yep. And here's the other thing. Bill Clinton, I think foolishly, said something about how he would like to normalize relations with Iraq or at least look into it or something. And boy, he should not have said that because people got all upset and tried to figure out how to stop it, including the Kuwaitis. And what happened was, I know you're familiar with this, we all are, and virtually everyone gets this wrong. The myth that Saddam Hussein tried to murder George H.W. Bush with a truck bomb assassination attempt in Kuwait in 1993. Total hoax. Debunked by Seymour Hersh by the end of the year in an article for The New Yorker called Case Not Closed. He shows it was just a whiskey smuggling ring that they embellished into this plot against Bush. And then it was Martin Indyk, who was Bill Clinton's advisor. Who was he? He was an Australian who'd been working for Yitzhak Shamir, the Likud party, former terrorist, murderer, and then Likud party prime minister of Israel. And Indyk had gone from there to go work in, I don't know exactly the time off, a year or so. He stopped and went to work for Clinton. In the meantime, he founded the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, WINEP, which was directly a spinoff of AIPAC. AIPAC put up the money. That's the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, the heart of the Israel lobby. They put up the money for the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, which you have heard that name a million times and you're going to continue to hear it because they are always cited as middle-of-the-road scientific experts on American foreign policy when they were, and this is not the same about all neocon think tanks, but this one was literally created by the Israel lobby in the United States. And then he became an advisor to Bill Clinton, and he was insisting on this policy of essentially continuing the H.W. Bush policy of staying in Saudi Arabia in order to patrol the so-called no-fly zones over Iraq to keep Saddam Hussein from killing the Iraqis and enforce the blockade, which was enforced by world law anyway, right? Like there's some smuggling going on or whatever, but no nation state is violating the embargo against Iraq here. So it's completely unnecessary on both counts. But the Israelis, and this is Rabin's government, Yitzhak Rabin's government, is, I guess, in agreement with this Likud guy, Indyk, on this. They're pushing for a policy that they called dual containment. And the point was that Iraq, now that we beat them up so bad in Iraq War I, Desert Storm, First Gulf War, now they're not powerful enough to balance against Iran. So now America has to stay in Saudi Arabia to balance against them both. And Bill Clinton resisted this until the big fake assassination attempt against Bush Sr., which again, I don't have any reason to believe the Israelis were behind that. It was the Kuwaitis who rigged up. Oh, did I leave out that it was the girl who pretended that she saw the babies thrown out of their incubators? Right. It was her father was the one who spun up this story. So in other words, the same guy who spun up that story was the same guy who spun up this story about the assassination attempt against Bush Sr., which everybody still believes, and which I'm sure Bush Jr. believed at the time that he launched that war probably. Was he read Seymour Hersh? He doesn't know. And it was just conventional wisdom. And I was still just a teenager in the 1990s, but I don't remember, wow, that assassination against Bush thing was debunked. I don't remember that ever getting around. You know what I mean? I don't know who was reading Hersh at that time. It was pre-internet times by a year, right? It just wasn't a hot enough topic. You know what I mean?
How do you fight those false narratives that the military-industrial complex tries to produce in order to get us into war?
Well, the main thing is,
speak up.
I think the most important thing is read antiwar.com every day for a long period of time in a row, and you will have a very good handle on what the hell is going on in the world. It's founded by Eric Garris and Justin Raimondo, who are both a couple of libertarians. Raimondo was a student of Murray Rothbard's, or at least one of his mentees, learned a lot from heir of his foreign policy thought, Murray and Rothbard, the best libertarian. And so that's where we come from, is that tradition. And, Ron Paulian, non-interventionist types. But the news is, but our opinion pieces come from all over the spectrum as long as we're anti-war. We're not sectarians at all. It's a one issue thing. And really, we just do the hard news more than anything. We have a lot of great editorials as well, but it's Eric Garris and Dave DeCamp and Kyle Anzalone who get the lion's share of the credit for the actual work that goes into the site every day.
And that goes to every single war in the world.
Everything, every day. We have our top news, we have a frontline section, and then at the bottom, we have every region of the world where there's conflict breaking out.
Trump sends 2 nuclear subs towards Russia, so obviously Russia.
That's reassuring. God. And you see our spotlight article is by Bronco March Teach, and he's a leftist, but we love him. He does absolutely fantastic work.
So it doesn't matter if you're left or right.
That's right. And we're very close with the American Conservative magazine, for example. Pat Buchanan is a good friend of ours, and we ran his articles for many years. Ron Paul, of course, as well, the greatest American ever.
Ron Paul is amazing. And you give love and respect to Ron Paul all the time.
He absolutely deserves it.
We spoke of heroes. He's one of the legends.
That's how I knew antiwar.com was for me the first day I laid eyes on it. My friend said, look, they run Ron Paul. And I went, I like these guys.
Can we take a quick pause for bathroom break?
Sure. So before we get too far into Bill Clinton, I should say, because I did say these words, I know the New World Order thing, that was a very popular conspiracy theory in the 90s and even before that, which was about building a one world government under the United Nations and subsuming the United States under it and all that. That's not what I'm talking about. And I actually was a New World Order kook in the 1990s, but I was a kid. It's fine. I grew out of it. But point being, Bush Sr. did use that phrase repeatedly. Yeah. And what he meant by it was, in the guise of the United Nations, baby blue flag and all of that for like PR purposes more than the real agenda, he was saying American power is the guarantor of world peace and we will enforce it through war, right? And that's the deal of it. Nobody's allowed to fight or we will intervene, right? So it's just essentially, it's the irony, right? That any government powerful enough to keep the peace between the 50 states is powerful enough to try it for the rest of the world as they can. They do this. We're just extending our security umbrella. Everybody who joins up with us is guaranteed nobody's going to ever mess with you or else they'd have to mess with us, except for everyone on the outside who now are put in the position of having, not just the United States, but all of their allies lined up against them and feel that much, more threatened, namely, of course, Russia and China, the other major potential adversaries and nuclear weapon states.
And I think the lesson there is if you think you can run the world by threatening everybody with military power, considering all the varied cultures and peoples and histories of the world, you're going to fuck things up. Right. You're going to create a lot of hate. You're going to create a lot of increased war, increased terrorism, increased threats to America versus decreased.
Yeah. So more on the neocons here too, before we get too far into Bill Clinton, is in 1992, a year after the end of Iraq War I, under Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz, his deputies, Scooter Libby and Zalmay Khalilzad, wrote what was called the Defense Planning Guidance for 1994, for fiscal year 1994. And it caused a huge upset. It was leaked to the New York Times, and it became a really big deal because what it said was America is essentially world police. We're not going to tolerate the rise of any near-peer competitor against us in the world. Like, we'll fight them before we allow them to get powerful enough to even be one. We will not let any nation or group of nations become powerful enough to ever even be able to think about challenging our military dominance on the planet. And of course, we're doing all this in the interests of world peace. And that means that we have to have total military dominance in the Middle East. We have to expand NATO and have total military dominance in Eastern Europe. And of course, we have to maintain our position with Japan and Korea and the rest in order to maintain total dominance in Asia as well. And this is what Charles Krauthammer called our unipolar moment again, and said we should stop short of nothing less than total world domination. That was the quote. And at that time, Jean Kirkpatrick, who had been a neoconservative, she was a member of the Young People's Socialist League of the Social Democrats USA, which were the Trotskyites under Max Schachtman, who was Trotsky's most important guy in the United States. And this is something that Mark Dubowitz tried to deny and argue with me about of whether she was a neoconservative or not. Well, she was, like James Woolsey, a Presbyterian. Now, most neoconservatives are Jewish and or Catholic, although you have Bazalgeh Khalilzad and Francis Fukuyama and others who are of other, different, cultural inheritances, you might say there. And so the defining characteristics, and he was saying, well, she didn't believe in democracy as the single most important thing in the whole world. And of course, she had written this article in the national interest that had gotten Reagan's attention in the first place, saying that it's okay to support authoritarians as long as they're right-wingers and anti-communists, that anti-communism is more important than democracy. And so we should for example, we should support people like Somoza in Nicaragua and things like that in order to keep the commies at bay, that's number one. And so some of the neocons disagreed with that. Dubowitz was trying to say that's what makes her not a neocon, but that's really not true, because neocons, there's about 100 of them or something, and they disagree about all kinds of things. They sure do work together on lots of things, but sure they disagree on things. I'll give another example on democracy, where Robert Kagan said in 2013 that we should allow the Muslim Brotherhood to rule in Egypt because they won fair and square, parliament and the presidency, just barely. They won in fair elections. And after all we've done in the name of democracy, don't we have to allow them to have a chance? Well, Frank Gaffney was like, are you kidding me? Like, I'll go overthrow him myself right now. Are you crazy? He's got an H-bomb going off over his head. Is anyone going to deny that Frank Gaffney is a neoconservative just because he differed with Robert Kagan on his order of importance in democracy in this or that instance? Give me a break. Jean Kirkpatrick came from the neoconservative left. She wrote for Commentary Magazine with Norman Podhoretz and all the guys. And I don't mean, again, just a leftist. She was with the Trotskyites, Max Schachtman, and the Young People's Socialist League and the Social Democrats USA. So she's like a card-carrying neoconservative. This is what it means to be a neocon. And she wrote, and then she was Reagan's second ambassador to the United Nations, was widely respected by the Republicans as a conservative hawk and a very American interest-oriented type. And she would even rail against the UN itself in almost a Bircher sounding kind of way that appeals to me. Although she didn't really mean it. She was just mad that they would ever get in our way rather than that they really are a threat to our independence in any way. But the point is this, man, that I'm trying to get to is at the end of the Cold War, a year before the Soviet Union was even gone, in the fall of 1990. So she must have written this in the summer of 1990. This is a year before the failed commie coup and the final unraveling where the Russians overthrew the last of the Soviet Union government at that time at the end of 91. This is a year before that. And she, importantly, right on the confirmation bias trick again, it's Jean Kirkpatrick, right? Not Susan Sarandon. It's Jean Kirkpatrick who wrote this piece in the National Interest called A Normal Country in a Normal Time. The only place you can find it is on my website, scotthorton.org/fair use. And I won't tell you where I got it. And don't ever sue me, National Interest. I love you guys. And the thing is,
Yeah.
So it's in there somewhere. You have to page down. There it is right there. Normal Country in a Normal Time. March, that's the date I published it. Fall 1990.
A Normal Country in a Normal Time. You published it on March 23rd, 2022. It's by Jean Kirkpatrick, The National Interest, fall 1990. It's the first time since 1939 that there has been an opportunity for Americans to consider what we might do in a world less constrained by political and military competition with a dangerous adversary. I am pleased that the National Interest has provided a forum for this discussion. And it goes on. American purposes are mainly domestic. Our purpose in the world are merely human, not transcendent. To be legitimate, the American government's purpose must be ratified by popular majorities.
Here's what she says in here. She says, we should eschew the burdens of superpower status. She sounds like George Washington. She's saying, okay, the commies are gone. The Cold War is over. The emergency is over. So now we can go back to being what we were supposed to be, what we used to be before, that we put on hold because we had to wage the Cold War. Now we can have a real return to normalcy, meaning 28, right? Before the permanent world empire was built for the purposes of destroying the Nazis and then containing the commies.
So she was very anti-communist and neoconservative perspective. She had a significant role in the Reagan administration. And then after she've evolved in saying we need to let go.
That's right. In other words, she is here. She's aligned with Pat Buchanan. Now, for people who aren't familiar with Pat Buchanan, he's a Catholic paleo-conservative. He was Nixon's speechwriter and Reagan's speechwriter. To this day, he's retired, sweet old guy now, but he's lifelong Cold Warrior and doesn't regret it. The commie threat absolutely had to be contained. Vietnam had to be done. He's a wonderful guy. He really is. And he's written just a grip of great books. I mean, I don't know, 8 or 10 of them.
So there's an evolution here. There's some of the folks really saw Russia and the Soviet Union as a major threat.
Oh, yeah.
And then they've evolved saying, okay, now that the Cold War is over, we need to calm down.
And see, Pat is the perfect avatar for this. Him and his buddies, you know, Scott McConnell and Jude Wanniski. Wanniski himself had been a former neoconservative. But there's this whole group of paleo-conservatives who nobody can question their patriotism. I mean, this is Ronald Reagan's guy. This is the guy that puts words in Ronald Reagan's mouth, right? Mm-hmm. And he's saying, okay, you guys promised the empire was a defensive measure, right? We don't want an empire. Chalmers Johnson is another one. Chalmers Johnson was a professor at USC who was a hardcore, ardent Cold Warrior. You're familiar with him. I'm sure he wrote the book Blowback and then Sorrows of Empire and Nemesis, or the trilogy that he wrote about the American empire then. And he was adamantly Cold Warrior until the Soviets were gone, and then the empire continued to expand. And then he went, wait a minute now. I taught a generation of students that we were holding the tide back. What's all this about we're the tide now? That's not right. And in fact, I like to cite this because it's just so astonishing to people that William F. Buckley, one of the major, not that he was a neoconservative, he wasn't, but he was one of their main godfathers, basically, the founding editor of the National Review. He wrote an article in 1952 in Commonweal magazine. Again, you can find this at scotthorton.org/fair use. It's called The Party in the Deep Blue Sea. It's about the Republican Party, I guess is what it means. Party in the Deep Blue Sea. And in there he says, we must accept a totalitarian bureaucracy on our shores for the duration of the emergency, even with Truman at the reins of it all, because of the need to face down the Soviet threat. And you need a powerful domestic empire that's capable of forcing the American people to enforce a world empire to contain the threat of Stalinist Soviet communism.
That's horrible, right?
Yes.
A totalitarian bureaucracy.
The same one we still got. And see, Pat said, okay, look, I was buying it when the enemy was in Moscow. But now that there's no enemy in Moscow, and world communism, the threat of world revolution is dead and gone. Well, I don't want to hear it about why we have to suffer this anymore. We're supposed to be, and then again, this is why I cite Gene Kirkpatrick. I could just cite Ron Paul to you all day long here, right? But everybody knows that Ron Paul is good on everything. The point is here is these are people who are very hawkish when they feel like it needs to be. You might even, your readers might, or your listeners, viewers might think that Ron Paul is just too biased for peace. Well, Pat ain't, okay? Pat is willing to fight, but not if there's not a good reason to. And that's the big qualification. Why would a guy like Pat be anti-war? We know he's not a hippie. There must be another explanation. And the other explanation is he is learned. He knows more about this than you. And he knows why you shouldn't do this because this is what's going to happen if you do. And That's the kind of guy he is. And that's why he and his paleo-conservative friends said, okay, enough. We want to come home. And so Jean Kirkpatrick, she didn't really join with the paleocons, but she was certainly aligning with him on this issue at this time, that now's our chance to go back to being a limited constitutional republic with a free economy, and a usually successful commercial republic, I believe she says in the piece. And which had a typo because it said unusually, but she couldn't have meant that. Go ahead.
I don't know. I think I lean towards Ron Paul a little bit. I don't think totalitarian bureaucracy is justified ever. Almost. I mean, you can come up with a really extreme case, but really, you're going to get into trouble.
This is why the Berkshires turned against the Cold War during Vietnam. Robert Welch, I mean, you can't get more anti-communist than that guy, the leader of the Birch Society. But he goes, wait a minute, why are we turning our country into a communist country in the name of containing communism over there? And he was being very liberal with the use of the word there, but meaning, why are we building a total state here when that's everything that we're trying to oppose in Vietnam, but we're building it here at home? Is crazy. We need to save this money. We need to build our country and lead the world by example, not by force. It was the obvious thing. And if it was that obvious to Robert Welch and to Ron Paul during the Cold War, then after the Cold War, you got to make up a bunch of crap about Saddam Hussein as Hitler and he's killing all the babies in their incubators and these kinds of Belgian babies on bayonets and related hoaxes to keep the thing going. Because again, as Richard Pryor said, that doesn't make any sense to me, right? Like if it doesn't just sound right to your average guy, you tell me we had to face down Hitler, all right. We had to face down Stalin and Mao, that makes sense. We got to bomb Gaddafi? There's not a better way that we, USA, #1, can handle that. Same kind of thing going forward here. And this is why, and I like to emphasize this so much, is that in the aftermath of Vietnam, people think that, peace is just hippies and leftists and anti-Americans of one stripe or another, people who are just no good in a fight anyway. So what do they know about security, right? Jack Nicholson, I stand on that wall. Even think about what a joke that was. He was down in Guantanamo Bay. Keeping Castro at bay for me? Yeah, thanks a lot, dude. I can't handle that truth, whatever you're burying down there. A lot of torture later, but anyway.
So you're saying like it's really people that were hawks for a time woke up.
That's right.
The reality of the ridiculousness, the absurdity of what a totalitarian bureaucracy does is it expands and creates momentum, and then you're now become the thing you were fighting.
Right. But Francis Fukuyama knew better. He said, no, it's the end of history. And America has proven that more or less democracy and more or less free market capitalism, as like Bill Clinton would define them or something of that era, that's the future of mankind. We proved it. They tried every other way of having a modern, successful society, and this is the one and only way to do that. And not only that then, but that's obviously America's mandate. And all his neocon friends took it as America's mandate that we're going to force the world to accept our ways in that same way. Of course, the British justified their obviously very self-interested empire in the very same way, that we're going to teach you to have a separate independent judiciary at any cost, right? It's all the, I hate to say it, but the white man's burden type of argument that, and they say this to this day. Look, if it wasn't us, it would be the Russians. If it wasn't us, it would be the Chinese. If it wasn't us, it would be somebody else and it would be worse. And so that's it. And so it is our responsibility. We're the most mature and adult and responsible stewards of global power. And so it has to be us to do this. And that was what it said in the defense planning guidance. And now it's true that Bush lost that election and the Clintonites came in. But as Paul Wolfowitz bragged, again in the national interest, by the end of the decade, that they all adopted the Wolfowitz doctrine anyway. That, like, for example, Bill Clinton going right around NATO to do the war in Kosovo in 1999 because he wanted to. And Russia had a veto on the UN Security Council. And so, well, forget that. We just go around that. That's straight out of the Wolfowitz doctrine, right? That it's what's good for us and our predominance of power in those regions of the world is what matters the most. And these other considerations will have to take a back seat to make sure that we can be the guarantors of our world order, regardless of what the treaties everybody signed up for say. And so that really is what they call the Wolfowitz doctrine. It's not just, hey, let's go to Iraq for Israel, although that's a huge part of it, but it's let's America, our military power is always beneficial compared to the alternative. And so we should be the ones to guarantee the peace or the war But in our case, if it's war, it's only because the alternative was worse, we promise. And so that's the doctrine. And there is an ideology of American empire here. I don't want to dismiss the corruption. It's a huge part. I mean, if hopefully we have time later and talk really about the new Cold War with Russia, we can talk a lot about the role that Lockheed and the other military industrial complex firms played in pushing all these policies forward. It was true with Iraq too. The Committee on the Liberation of Iraq was sponsored by Bruce Jackson from Lockheed Martin. And he also financed the Project for a New American Century of Bill Kristol and Robert Kagan. He financed the Weekly Standard magazine. And the agenda was like, let's sell NATO planes in Europe and let's push for war in the Middle East. And there's a lot of self-interested reasons there. But I think overall, like, you got to take these people at their word when they say, we know we're heroes. We know we're doing the right thing. We know everybody's better off without us. We know that we have to. This is our morality-based foreign policy. We just can't allow that bad thing to happen any longer. We have to do something worse to stop it. And this kind of thing is very, like, you could tie it back to, like, whatever. I'm not this smart to talk all about the influence of the Pilgrims and their glorious mission, you know, in ancient Massachusetts to create the new city on the hill to be like the new Zion and ultimately determine the fate of mankind. But there's a lot of Yankee busybodyhood that is built into this. And of course, the Scotch-Irish like to get drunk and get into fist fights for fun. And I take responsibility for that as a bit of my background too. I'm not being a racist bigot, but like that's part of our culture is like being a tough guy and being able to get in a brawl and win one or even suffer a defeat and not cry about it. You know what I mean? And like,
some of that, which I mean, it's a double-edged sword of human nature, is the Scots-Irish. I mean, they're so, and I had a great conversation with Sagar and Jetty about this, are so foundational to the individualism that makes America great.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get into trouble when you start to believe
tell them there's a bad guy out there.
And you start, and then you have the biggest military in the world, and there's Lockheed Martin, there's the military industrial complex, and now you think you're better than everybody, and now you're creating wars all over the place.
Yep.
Creating enemies all over the place.
And see, of course, there's partisanship is all built into this. Is everybody supports their guy because the other guy we can't let them win. So we can't undermine, even when we disagree with our own guy, we can't undermine him or we're helping the other guys are going to get him in the midterms or they'll get him in the next election. So people close ranks around things they even disagree with just because they consider, again, the alternative worse. That's even from the point of view of voters a lot of times that, like, you know, even Murray Rothbard endorsed George H.W. Bush, who had just done the Iraq War, because Rothbard's like, well, at least he hates Yitzhak Shamir, and at least he's not bringing Hillary Clinton and the leftist cultural revolution with him, right? So, well, just, you know, people got to make these choices and make their comparisons of, you know, what they favor or what they value at any given time and make those compromises, you know?
And that's why you said antiwar.com is nonpartisan, right?
That's right. Yeah, we're reaching out to everybody. We're here to inform everybody. Again, as I was mentioning during the short break there, that Hawks read our website too, because if you want really the best briefing of what's going on in the country, like we do hear from them from time to time that, like, I got to admit, those guys really do have the most comprehensive coverage of the stuff I'm interested in, even if from their point of view, the wrong point of view.